Nick Dunn looks like the kind of man people trust at first glance. Comb face, easy smile. The sort of husband a neighbor would describe as normal, maybe a little distant, maybe a little tired, but never dangerous. That is exactly why Gone Girl works so well. It starts with a familiar image. A missing wife, a worried husband, a house full of signs that something went wrong. But the deeper the story goes, the more every normal detail starts to feel poisoned. On the morning of his 5th wedding anniversary, Nick returns home and finds the front door open. Furniture is broken, glass is scattered across the floor. His wife, Amy, is gone. At first, the scene looks like the beginning of a kidnapping or a murder. There are signs of struggle, but no body. No direct answer, just absence, and absence is powerful. It lets everyone imagine the worst before they know anything at all. Nick calls the police, and very quickly his life stops belonging to him. Detectives Rhonda Boney and Jim Gilpin arrive and begin asking questions with the kind of patience that makes every reply feel loaded. Nick says the right things, but he does not say them the right way. He's too blank, too awkward, too careful, and sometimes not careful enough. He smiles at the wrong moment. He hesitates. He seems less like a devastated husband than a man trying to remember how devastated husbands are supposed to act. Amy, meanwhile, is introduced to us through her diary. In her words, she sounds intelligent, charming, observant, and deeply in love when the marriage begins. Nick is funny and warm. Their connection feels bright, effortless, almost literary. The contrast is immediate and deliberate. Public Nick looks suspicious. Diary Amy looks sympathetic. And once those two images settle into the viewer's mind, Gone Girl starts tightening the trap. Nick and Amy used to be New York people, the kind of couple who looked clever together. But recession, job loss, and family pressure pulled them back to Missouri, where they began building a life that never seemed to fit Amy as comfortably as it fit the version of her she sold to others. Nick now runs a bar with his twin sister Margot, known as Go. She is one of the few people who sees him clearly, and even she cannot fully tell whether he is hiding pain, guilt, or both. As the police investigation expands, details begin piling up. Amy had become increasingly unhappy. There were financial problems, credit card debt, tension, distance. The sort of private rot that often exists long before the outside world notices a marriage is collapsing. Then the media arrives, and once the media arrives, the case stops being just a police matter. It becomes a national performance. News anchors start telling the country who Amy was before the facts are settled. Pretty, intelligent, vanished on our anniversary. Maybe pregnant, maybe terrified before she disappeared. She becomes the perfect missing woman story. Attractive, polished, photogenic, and easy for strangers to emotionally adopt. Nick becomes the perfect suspect. Every awkward smile turns into evidence. Every detached answer becomes suspicious. Every old secret begins to look like motive. That is one of the smartest things about Gone Girl. It understands that in stories like this, guilt is often assigned through optics before proof. Once the public decides what role you belong in, every gesture starts serving that script. As the search continues, the anniversary treasure hunt Amy planned for Nick becomes important. Every year, she left clues leading him from one place to another. This year's clues, however, feel darker. What used to be playful starts feeling accusatory. Nick follows them anyway. Each clue points not just toward physical locations, but toward the shape of the marriage itself. Memory becomes evidence. Sentiment becomes manipulation. The hunt starts looking less like an anniversary game and more like a message from a woman who knew she might disappear. The police find more troubling information. Amy had visited a local pregnancy center. Amy had made entries in her diary describing fear. Amy had written that Nick changed after moving, that he became colder, more selfish, more frightening. Nick has been having an affair. That revelation hits like gasoline on fire, because now the story has everything the public wants in a missing wife case. A beautiful victim, an unhappy marriage, a cheating husband, financial stress, and a man who looks wrong every time a camera finds him. If you enjoy dark movie stories like this, subscribe to Cinema Trigger, leave a like, and comment the next film you want on the channel. Because this is not just a mystery. It is a story about control, image, and the terrifying power of narrative. Nick insists he did not kill Amy, But the problem is that innocence is much harder to sell than guilt once the world has already chosen its villain. He hires a lawyer, Tanner Bolt, a sharp defense attorney who instantly understands that the battle is no longer just legal. It is theatrical. Tanner knows public opinion matters. He knows television matters. He knows facial expression matters. In a case like this, truth alone is not enough. Truth has to perform well. Meanwhile, Amy's diary continues telling its version of events. It paints a marriage that moved from romance to unease, from unease to fear, from fear to the possibility that Amy believed Nick might one day hurt her. The diary is devastating because it feels intimate. It gives the impression of private truth. And private truth is incredibly persuasive, especially when the person telling it is missing and presumed dead. As detectives dig deeper into the house, they begin finding traces that point toward premeditation. Cleaned blood, signs that something violent happened. Purchases Nick cannot easily explain. Each discovery pushes him further into the role Amy seems to have designed for him. And then the film turns. Not slowly, not subtly. Completely. Amy is alive. She is not dead, not kidnapped, not hiding in terror. She is driving away from the life she built with Nick. And for the first time we see who she really is when no one else is watching. The diary was fake. At least the most incriminating parts were. The pregnancy story was staged. The blood in the kitchen was staged. The image of the abused wife fearing her husband was staged. Amy did not just disappear. She designed her own disappearance as a weapon. That is the moment Gone Girl stops being one story and reveals the colder, sharper story hiding underneath. Amy is not escaping Nick. She is punishing him, and her punishment is not impulsive. It is architectural. She has spent months preparing every detail, changing behavior, planting evidence, creating financial motive, writing fake diary entries, storing supplies, injuring herself, controlling timelines, calculating media reaction, even shaping the emotional language investigators will later use against Nick. She does not want to leave him quietly. She wants to erase him publicly. Amy explains her logic directly, and it is chilling. She loved the version of Nick she married. Or maybe she loved the version of herself reflected in him. But once he became lazy, dishonest, unfaithful, and ordinary, she decided he had betrayed the role he was supposed to play. And Amy cannot tolerate disappointment without turning it into theater. That is what makes her such an unforgettable character. She is not just angry. She is a perfectionist of vengeance. She does not merely want Nick to suffer. She wants him framed inside a story so complete that the world will help destroy him for her. As Amy hides out in a cheap Ozarks motel under a fake name, the fantasy begins cracking around the edges. She imagined perfect control, but control is harder to maintain in the real world than in the rehearsal inside your head. She is robbed by two people she trusted too casually. Money disappears. Plans weaken. For the first time, Amy is exposed to the chaos she usually manipulates from a distance. So she reaches for an old backup option, Desi Cullings. Desi is a wealthy ex-boyfriend who has loved Amy obsessively for years. He is exactly the kind of man who can be exploited by someone who knows how to mirror desire back at him. Amy calls him frightened and vulnerable, and he takes her in immediately. Desi's lake house becomes another prison disguised as care. He believes he is saving Amy. In reality, Amy is entering another enclosed environment she will eventually need to weaponize too. Back in Missouri, Nick finally begins understanding what Amy has done. Once he sees the scale of the setup, anger turns into clarity. He realizes that the only way to survive is to stop reacting privately and start fighting publicly. He goes on television. It is one of the most important scenes in the film because Nick does not go on TV to tell the truth, in the purest sense. He goes on TV to speak directly to Amy. He smiles, softens, performs, and talks like the man she wanted him to be. And it works. Amy sees the interview and feels something shift. Not because she suddenly forgives him, but because the performance reaches the part of her that still wants the marriage to exist as spectacle. Nick is finally speaking her language. Image, strategy, seduction through audience. That emotional shift sends the story into its final, darker movement. Amy turns on Desi. She stages another act. This time she transforms herself into the image of a woman held captive and abused. She manipulates Desi sexually, slits his throat during sex, and covers herself in his blood to create the perfect escape narrative. Then she returns home, and this is where Gone Girl becomes truly vicious. Amy comes back, not as a criminal exposed, but as a national miracle. The missing wife has returned. The media pivots instantly. She's now not just sympathetic, but Hiroka survivor who escaped unimaginable abuse. Desi becomes the dead monster. Nick becomes the husband who welcomed her back. The whole country swallows the news story, because the news story is emotionally satisfying. It has a villain, a victim, and a sensational ending. People prefer completed narratives to messy truth. Nick knows she is lying. Go knows she is lying. The audience knows she is lying. But knowledge is useless if it cannot compete with a story people desperately want to believe. Amy sits with detectives and journalists and tells them exactly what they need to hear. She adjusts tone, expression, vulnerability, in detail with terrifying precision. She does not merely lie well. She understands what every listener hopes a believable victim sounds like. That level of control makes her almost unbeatable. Nick confronts her privately, and the truth of their marriage finally stands naked between them. No romance, no mystery, no misunderstanding. Just two people who now see each other completely and are trapped anyway. Amy admits what she did with almost serene honesty when they're alone. She says she did it because Nick embarrassed her, betrayed her, and forced her to become someone she did not want to be. In her mind, the revenge is not insane. It is proportionate. That is why Gone Girl is so disturbing. Amy is not written like a chaotic madwoman. She is written like a person whose intelligence, vanity, resentment, and talent for performance fused into something predatory. Nick wants out. He wants to expose her, but Amy understands leverage better than anyone else in the story, and she has one final move. She inseminates herself with Nick's sperm from a fertility clinic sample and tells him she is pregnant. That changes everything. Now leaving means abandoning an unborn child. Staying means living inside a marriage built on blackmail, spectacle, resentment, and fear. It is one of the cruelest traps in modern thriller storytelling because the cage is no longer legal or physical. It is emotional, moral, and public, all at once. Nick and Amy appear on television as the restored couple, smiling beneath the lights, while the reality underneath the image is rotten beyond repair. To the outside world, they are survivors. To each other, they are opponents locked into permanent intimacy. That is the real ending of Gone Girl. Not that Amy wins, though she does in many ways. Not that Nick loses, though he does in many ways too. The real ending is that both of them become prisoners of the story that now sustains them. Nick stays, at least for now, because the child changes the calculation. Amy stays, because staying lets her keep the narrative, the image, and the husband she no longer loves, but still refuses to release. What makes the film so powerful is that it is never only about plot twists. Yes, the reveal that Amy is alive is incredible. Yes, the framing scheme is brilliant. Yes, Desi's death is shocking. But the reason Gone Girl lingers is that it understands something ugly about modern relationships and modern media at the same time. People do not just live their lives. They perform them. Amy is the extreme version of that truth. She curates herself constantly. She knows the fantasy men want, the victim the media wants, the wife the public wants, and the survivor television wants. She does not have one identity. She has a wardrobe of identities, and she uses each one when it becomes useful. Her cool girl monologue says almost everything. She describes the way women are expected to become whatever version of femininity men find easiest to consume. Fun, sexy, effortless, always supportive, never inconvenient. Amy hates that role, but she is also brilliant at playing it when it serves her. That contradiction is part of what makes her so fascinating. She despises performance, yet she masters it. She mocks fantasy, yet builds her life through fantasy. She wants authenticity, but only on terms she can dominate. Nick, on the other hand, is weaker, sloppier, more ordinary, but not innocent. He lies, he cheats, he avoids hard truths until they explode. He is not a monster in Amy's league, but he is exactly the kind of man whose laziness creates emotional wreckage and then acts surprised by the consequences. That imbalance makes the story richer. If Nick were purely good, Amy would become too simple. If Amy were purely evil without insight, the story would lose its bite. Gone Girl works because both of them understand each other just enough to be dangerous. The media in the film is almost a third partner in the marriage. It magnifies, simplifies, and weaponizes every development. It rewards emotional certainty. It does not want complexity. It wants a clean villain on Monday and a triumphant survivor on Friday. Amy understands that machine perfectly. Nick learns too late that surviving inside it requires performance of his own, and that is why the ending feels so cold. There is no real justice, no cleansing revelation, no final truth, powerful enough to wash away manipulation. There is only a stronger story swallowing a weaker one. Gone Girl leaves you with one brutal thought. In the right hands, narrative can be stronger than evidence, stronger than intimacy, and sometimes even stronger than truth. That is what Amy weaponizes better than almost any thriller character in recent memory. She does not need to overpower Nick physically for most of the film. She overpowers him by controlling the frame around him. Once she decides what he is supposed to look like to the world helps her hold him there. And maybe that is the darkest part of all. The story does not ask whether marriage is built on trust. It asks what happens when marriage becomes a battlefield of image, ego, and authorship. Who gets to tell the story? Who gets believed? Who gets to define what happened inside a house no outsider truly understands? Amy wins because she knows that question matters more than reality itself. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Cinema Trigger, leave a like, and comment the next movie you want covered, because the most dangerous people are not always the strongest or the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who know exactly how to turn a lie into the only version of the truth the world wants to hear.